Good morning, everybody. Please can I welcome everybody to this decision day. The time is 9 a.m. This decision day is being held under the regulations which came into effect on the 4th of April 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Councillor Martin Todd, the Cabinet Member for Service Quality and Transformation at Winchester City Council. There are a few housekeeping reminders to run through as there are new working practices in response to the regulations. First of all, can I ask everyone present that your microphones remain muted and your camera is turned off whilst you are not addressing the decision day, as this will reduce background noise and avoid any unintentional disturbances. Please can I also advise that this decision day is being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website. In addition, a video recording of the decision day will be uploaded to the Council's YouTube channel in due course. When speaking and referring to the agenda papers, please make sure you reference the page or paragraph number. Thank you. Please can I ask the Democratic Services Officer to confirm the names of officers present this morning.
Morning. Yes. In addition to myself, Nancy Graham, Democratic Services, we've Matthew Watson from Democratic Services, Richard Botham, Strategic Director Services, and from Legal, Catherine Knight.
And
sorry, I do apologise, and Campbell Williams.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.
And I think
Simon Finch
sorry,
as well.
Monday morning. I'm just seeing, and Simon Finch as well.
Can I see Ellen Simpson there as well?
Yes, yes, she is.
That is fine.
I don't think. Oh, and Andy Hickman as well.
Oh, the gang's all here. Thank you very much indeed. No, that's great.
Sorry,
thank you very
apologies.
much indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any declarations of interest from councillors or officers present? Please use the hands up function to indicate, and I will invite you to speak. I don't see any hands up. I will assume there are no interests to be declared. I will declare a brief interest in parting. I'm a county councillor, and on-street parking is managed under a licence agreement with an agency agreement with the county council, though it doesn't affect off-street. The next item on the agenda is public participation. I've received notification that the following people have registered to speak under public participation. Simon Evans from Alresford Chamber of Commerce and Fiona Isaacs, the chair of Alresford Chamber of Commerce. And I'd like to start with Simon Evans. Mr. Evans, can I invite you to unmute your microphone and turn on your camera and make your representation? Please note you both have 3 minutes to speak. I can see that Mr. Evans is in the meeting. I don't know if he's wrestling with the technology. Otherwise, I'm happy to change the order while Mr. Evans sorts out his technology, and we'll start with, and if somebody could contact him and maybe help, otherwise I'll start with Fiona Isaacs, Chair of Alresford Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Isaacs, would you please make your deputation?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Todd. We've just had notice of this meeting, and although we were at the stakeholder meeting, which was called at short notice, unfortunately that's why Simon Evans couldn't attend that meeting, there were documents associated to today's meeting that we hadn't had sight of, and I'd just really like to say that the Chamber doesn't support this application unless we can tweak one thing. As it stands correctly, if I'm wrong, please correct me, that the lease for the station car park has gone up by an extra £10,000 a year. And although the income for the entire car park is £52,000 as it stands at the current price, the extra amount that would be generated by the increased prices is something along the region of £50,000 extra a year, which would more than cover the extra £10,000 rent. This is obviously extra to what is normally generated. even if we take, in fact, actually that's more, the 57,000 is the actual, if it was at full capacity. The 80% capacity, and this is based on, say, either one car every 3 hours for 3 hours or one car for 3 hours, not much in it, 10 pence difference. Even at 80% capacity, that would still give the council £50,900 extra a year for this car park. I don't personally have any issue with that, although I would want to register our concerns that this is only a little market town, and although the strategy says it's commonplace for Winchester to have higher car park prices in the centre of Winchester, it is only a little market town. We're 90% independent. We've worked so hard to make sure that we all survive the pandemic and still keep on top of everything as a town, that we can't outprice people wanting to stop. However, that being said, if the council is keeping the money, and there's certainly a lot of money to be made with the increases in the car park, having gone to the new site, the proposed site where the permit parking would be allowed, which is on the Winchester city side, which is actually only 40 spaces, because at the meeting the other 4 would be left in the station side. It's just not big enough for some of the commercial vehicles. The spaces are very narrow. Far too narrow. So the proposal is that we leave it open with permits across the whole place. I understand the pricing to put people off. Staying longer is from the station. Well, that doesn't alter that, and it doesn't alter the fact that the permits are on a first come first served basis, but it would mean that the businesses in the town can operate properly.
Sorry, just for my understanding, I could ask you this later in the meeting, but it's probably helpful for people watching to understand now. When you say leave it open with permits across the site, what do you mean? Is your wish that the permits be valid anywhere in the car park? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the vans that are used, for instance, I'll give an example. Evans van's quite large. There's no way that it can successfully get in and out. Plus also, the restriction for the station is they want to prevent people staying longer. Those vehicles with season tickets in and out, there's no guarantee of a space. They know that. So if they leave to go on a delivery, for instance, and come back and there's no space, then they'll have to park somewhere else. But forcing them to park in that small area when it makes no difference to the station, because we're not preventing the station guests from parking in that area. It's open to anybody. So my proposal is that we allow the season tickets to park anywhere that they need to, because it doesn't affect anybody. It's not guaranteed. And the people that are using that car park for shorts, they can choose whether they want to pay the increased amount or whether they want to park in the other car parks. But from the business community, there's an awful lot of people that use that if available, and it needs to be the whole car park so that they can get their bigger vehicles, because that side is just not suitable. And to be honest, It makes no difference to the station as far as income at all.
Thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful clarification, and we will address that point later in the meeting. And thank you for raising that issue. Mr. Evans, is your system working now, and are you able to make your deputation?
I'm here, Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see you, but that's half the battle won. I can see you as well. That's brilliant. Wonderful. Okay, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your patience with my technology Monday morning. I would agree with the Chair of the Chamber of Commerce on the request to make this proposal suitable for the permit holders to use the whole of the station car park if they have a valid permit ticket, not just the corner area as per the proposal reads at the moment. My main concerns, there was a couple of concerns that I'd like to put across to you all this morning. My first one is I understand that when you're negotiating something like this, both parties have to be, understanding and come to an agreement. I just don't think this is the right agreement for the town. It's something that really should be forming part of the parking strategy that we really desperately need in the town to make sure that we all feel as though this subject is being taken seriously and it's part of quite a large project that we all really want to feed into. My second point is just about the finances. So we're going to go from, if you want to park for 3 hours, then we're going to go from about 80 pence, I think it is currently, to £3. So there will be extra income for Winchester City Council on this proposed agreement. And I've done some quick maths because I like a bit of quick maths. And I can show you my workings if you wish at some point, if anybody wants to see how I've worked this out. But there's going to be more money coming in from this 3-year agreement that the proposal is in front of us at the moment. And I would like to see a commitment, a promise, a statement from everybody here today that some of those funds will go towards the building of the car park in the Dean that so many different bodies, groups, committees, volunteers have put work into in this town. So I would agree with the Chamber of Commerce chairman on what she has just stated. I understand it's a difficult situation. I just think we need to tweak it a bit to make sure that we do the very best for all of the residents, all of the visitors, and all of the businesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for your deputation. That's very helpful. So I've also received notification that 2 councillors, Councillor Horrell and Councillor Power, wish to speak on item 4, the only item we have, which is the Mid Hampshire Railway car park. We are what we will do on that, you'll be invited to speak at the appropriate point in the item for discussion, which is after it's been introduced, and then we'll both have 5 minutes to speak. So let's move on to the Mid Hampshire car park paper, DD 28, pages 5 to 16 of the agenda pack. As we're hearing today, this is about a proposal to change the parking prices and arrangements in the Mid Hampshire Railway, in the car park at the end of station approach, which is mostly owned by Mid Hampshire Railway. Mr. Williams, are you able to take us through the paper in a bit more detail and outline what exactly is being proposed?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Councillor Todd. Hang on 1 second. So yes, so this is a paper about the Mid Hampshire Railway car park. So for a number of years, the council has managed the car park at the end of station approach. Part of the site, so there's about 84 spaces owned by the Mid Hampshire Railway, whilst the remainder, which is about 44 spaces, is owned by the council. The lease on the area owned by the railway came to an end in January, and the council has taken the opportunity to enter a new 3-year lease, which enables the whole site to be managed as a single public car park, which both supports access to the town centre as well as the operation of the railway, which is one of the major visit attractions in Alresford. So the Mid Hampshire Railway fully own the site and could take it back and introduce whatever charges they like. However, it's better that we have the site working as a single public car park. So what Mid Hampshire Railway want to do is to change the charges so they support the operation of the visitor railway attraction, which is short stay parking, which means that when you come to visit the railway, that there is a space for you to go and park in. But they also want people who are using the railway to be able to park all day via purchase of a ticket and then that being stamped in the ticket office. So rather than have 2 different sets of prices in a car park, which is going to be very, very difficult for customers and operation, what we're recommending is the changes are made to the whole station car park, so that the price in the part that the City Council owns matches the part that the railway owns, with the exception that railway patrons and season ticket holders will be able to park all day in defined areas of the site. So this doesn't have any impact on parking in central Alresford or in the public car parks in Perrins and Albury Park. But obviously we want to look at this as a whole and have had some discussions with Alresford Town Council and other groups about how we manage that as a whole. So what we are proposing is that we match the pricing structure to match that of Mid Hants Railway, but also one thing which doesn't match is allowing space in the section that we own for season ticket holders, who can also park in Perrins and Albury Park, to make sure that the signage in Alresford, to make sure that people understand where they're going and where they can park and what the best location for parking is updated, and agree to monitor and review that following implementation, including as part of the overall parking and access strategy. And clearly with sort of COVID underway at the moment and a route map for lockdown coming out very recently, part of this process will be reviewing and implementing that to make sure that the residents and businesses in Alresford are able to use these changes sufficiently. So that's a very quick summary of the report. Is there anything I need to add? I think that's a quick summary of where we are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. And I think what will be helpful, obviously you'll stay in the meeting. There's a few issues that have already been raised, but we'll come to those, I think, after we've had the deputations from councillors and heard their views on whether and how the proposals might need, what their reaction is to the proposals on the table. And there's already a couple of issues that we will need to talk through. But I will ask you about that later, the car park in the Dean and the situation with permits across the site. But we'll come to that later. First, I'd like to ask the councillors present if they're ready to make their deputations. I think Councillor Horrell was the first to...
Councillor Todd,
yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Councillor Horrell has sent her apologies.
Ah, right. Okay.
Just Councillor Power that wishes to speak now.
So I have Councillor Power. No, that's extremely helpful. So that will help us. Well, that'll save 5 minutes from the meeting. Although it's a shame not to hear Councillor Horrell's views. Councillor Power, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. First of all, I'd like to endorse the decision that Winchester Council take on this lease. Parking contractors running this car park would be an absolute disaster for the town. They don't have a kind attitude. I'd also like to set Mr Evans and Mrs Isaacs' minds at rest regarding the costs of the Dean car park. There is 1.05 million set aside in the mid-term financial strategy to cover the development costs. We are, of course, waiting on a planning application of the owners and the developers of the site on the Dean. From recollection, in the master plan, that is a block of flats at the front and the car park behind. We can't move forward on developing the car park, of course, until we see a planning application for the site and indeed the buildings that are on it at the moment knocked down. I do have, regarding the spaces in the Winchester part of the car park, they are very tight, and both widthways and lengthways. However, I do recognise that the Mid Hants Railway have got us over a barrel on this. They really can dictate terms because it's what they want or nothing. So I'm interested to hear the views of officers on that. Couple of notes on the paper itself. 9.11 refers to the EV charging points. I think that as we have a lease with only 3 years to run, it would be imprudent to look at the installation costs on either part of the car park, actually. And maybe it would be best if we put that funding into Albury Park instead. I don't think it would be sensible to go ahead with things as they are at the moment. Another note on the definition, which is the Mid Hants Railway users having their tickets endorsed. If I was the Mid Hants Railway, on a quiet day, I would charge non-railway users a bounty for endorsing an all-day ticket. I think that would be a useful revenue stream for the railway, and I don't think it would impact on our revenue stream from this car park. I have some questions as well, and they're mainly in regard to the implementation period. I would like assurance that the people that have been interested in this decision, and I include those that attended the meeting with the Town Council and the Chamber, when will it be implemented? Will there be a period of leniency while we all get used to it? You've got some people who use that car park and have been doing so since they were born. I don't think they're going to take, they never read the documentation, they never read the notices, they've always parked there, that's how it's going to be. And I would like clarification of whether there will be enforcement on Sundays and whether the Mid-Hants Railway are aware of that, because I don't want any argy-bargy with the railway. I think that covers all my points, Councillor Todd. Thank you very much.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Power. Those important points raised, and I'll seek to go through them all in turn and ask officers for their response. We may end up, as officers know, I have a tendency to modify the recommendations in these meetings. We may end up with some adjustments to the recommendations at the end. So the first issue I'd like to talk about, and it'd be helpful to get officers' response to, is this question of the spaces in our area of the car park being quite narrow and not being suitable for some of the larger vehicles that will be wanting to use permits and keep vehicles there on a working basis during the day. And so I suppose that there's a couple of questions there, and the first is, what options do we have to allow vehicles with permits to be parked anywhere in the car park? I imagine this would actually be easier for us to implement, because we would no longer need to separately identify a separate section of the car park. But what options do we have on that? Is it something we can agree today, or is it something we can seek to achieve, or is it something that, yeah, well, Mr. Williams, are you the person to answer this question?
I can have a go. Yes. So we don't own the land which the majority of the spaces are on. So the Mid-Hants Railway own the land where the additional car parking spaces would be, and so what they're intending to do is to ensure that visitors to the car park, visitors to the railway, are able to park in the car park, because that's what they want for short stay. So what they're not keen on is season ticket holders filling up the area. However, so we could, so it's in their ball court really. But what we don't necessarily know, because there's COVID at the moment, it's been very difficult to work out what in normal operation would be the number of vehicles parking in there with a season ticket, because we can't measure that at the moment. And we know how many there are overall, but we don't necessarily know which ones are located in Albury Park, Perrins, Bishop's Waltham, or in the railway car park. So we could have a conversation with the railway to see what the situation is there, but their intention is not to have spaces outside the railway full of people parking there all day. That's the intention. So it's difficult for us to control that, but we could certainly have a conversation with them if that was required, to see what the options might be. I think the other thing is, if vehicles are if the markings in our car park are not suitable for vehicles which would use it. It's our car park and we own it, and if we required to, I guess the lines and signage could be changed to accommodate those vehicles, if that was an issue.
Okay, might it be, because of the slightly strange shape of our land holding, we think we have 2 or 3 spaces that aren't in what is apparently our bit of the car park, if you see what I mean. There's the section at the end that's very obviously change of surface, everything different bit of the car park, and then there are a couple of spaces where we're originally looking to put EV charging points in the main body of the car park, which people might think belongs to the city council, to the the Mid Hampshire Railway, but actually belong to us. I mean, is that something we could use as potential negotiation point in terms of saying, well, look, if you let us have a couple of, we'll manage those spaces differently. Okay, so if I understand the situation correctly, legally we are not in a position to unilaterally decide to allow people to park across the car park. It is something we can ask the Mid Hampshire Railway for, and it has the advantage from our perspective of being easier to implement. And we can also look at adjusting the signage and the spacing in our section of the car park to allow for larger vehicles.
We could do that, yes.
Or create spaces suitable for larger vehicles. Ms. Isaacs, in theory, you can't come back, but in practice, I tend to run these meetings fairly informally. If you have a quick comment or question on this issue, on this point only, then I'd be interested to hear it.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think I've managed to do. Yeah, for the businesses, a lot of them are in and out, and they've always understood that it's on a first come first served basis. So as far as the businesses parking all day, that just doesn't happen. It's used overnight, usually out off the road, or it's used for deliveries, and then they're out and they're about and they come back. It's never guaranteed. As a chamber, we would not wish the 40 spaces on the council side to reduce because we need the spaces in the town. I'm not going to lie, we need those. So as a negotiation point, the more cars that can park across the whole place, and that includes their guests, the better for them and the better for the council because of money, but the better for everybody. So it's only a small portion of permit holders that are in and out that will actually be there all day. And to be honest, as far as the vehicle sizes go, it's mainly the vans that would have a problem in that area, but those are the ones that need quick access.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful clarification. I mean, what I've heard is that what we can agree is we can guarantee to allow the permits to work in our section of the car park, and we can, of course, have a further conversation with the Mid Hampshire Railway about the van problem in particular. So I understand your point there in terms of the desire for more flexibility. The second point that was touched on, and I may add a recommendation that adjusts that point. Mr. Finch, you're raising your hand. Is it this on this particular issue?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I just thought it's really, I think, just to reiterate, I think the point that you've made, we can have a discussion, but we're not in the driving seat, as you rightly point out, for that part of the car park. And I think, as Mr. Williams said in his introduction, it was a negotiation we had to have to keep it as a single entity, effectively, which we feel is the best way to manage the car park. However, the bottom line is ultimately, the lease we've had to sign, then, we can have that conversation with them, picking up on the points raised by the Chamber of Commerce to see what we can do to accommodate that. But I think it's clear, which you have been, is the fact that, we can have a discussion with them, but ultimately, it's down to them to decide. And as Mr. Williams said in his introduction, if we hadn't have signed the lease, then effectively they could have introduced whatever parking controls, charges, etc. they felt were appropriate for their site, which perfectly entitled to do, and we'd have to have run our 40 odd spaces differently, which is less than ideal. So I think it just bears repeating that point, and that's where we stand, I think. And from my recollection, and this has been going on a very long time in terms of the negotiation with the railway, they really were very keen, as Mr. Campbell pointed out, to make sure there's a high turnover of spaces in those in their part of the car park. So I'm not sure that they would be willing to accommodate, but we can have that discussion again. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, no, well, I may put a recommendation in place on this, and I'll suggest some words that might go, and you'll have to tell me whether I'm allowed to put them in or not. The second point that was raised was the point about the extra income from being used to support the building of a car park in the Dean. So my understanding from Councillor Power is that money isn't the problem. There is money in the capital budget reserved to build the car park in the Dean, and the issue is that it is not land that is owned by any public body. It is dependent on a planning application coming forward. Is that correct? Can I get some clarification on that issue? Is there anything that the extra revenue can be used for that would ease the wheels in this particular case? Mr. Finch.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Power's quite right. We had a funding strategy for the delivery of that car park. The frustration, if you like, is the fact, as you pointed out there, we don't own it yet. And it's subject to sort of other transactions happening, planning permission being granted, etc. But that's still very much the aspiration. As I say, we can look at funding options, but there was funding that we've made provision for should the site become available. If, of course, there was any shortfall there or whatever, then clearly we'd have to look at other funding options, of which, you know, parking reserve or whatever could be one of those options, I would have thought. But Councillor Power's quite right. You know, we've made provision for it, but we can't do it until we can acquire the site. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I think there is a point. Councillor Power, you wish to say something?
More in hope than in expectation, Councillor Todd. Is there any way we could use the extra revenue from the station car park to meet Hampshire County Council's requirement to turn a profit on the on-street parking so we can have some enforcement?
I think that's a helpful point, and I was actually going to come on to the question of enforcement and link it to revenue as part of it, because I certainly think this does actually quite dramatically change the financial picture as far as parking in Alresford is concerned, and we need to make sure that as far as we're able, the value of that extra revenue stays in Alresford. Mr. Botham.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Todd. Yeah, I just wanted to make that point really, that when setting the budget for the year that Council approved last week, we haven't assumed additional income from this car park as part of that base budget. So any additional revenue generated through the changes to feed-throughs, we have the capacity to retain that within Alresford if that's the desire of you as the cabinet member. So yes, scope for funding additional enforcement or looking at or reviewing alternative options if we're unable to find larger spaces within the car park area. We can, you know, it has the potential to provide funding to support both of those potentials.
And Mr. Botham, if I'm correct, I mean, the way we've seen parking revenue surplus in the Winchester City is that it contributes towards a parking and access fund, which we've deliberately defined fairly broadly in terms of how it can be used. So something to be mindful of, and I think something that we put in scope for the next round of the work on the parking and access strategy is to say, how might we use any extra revenue generated in the context, dare I say, of where car parks during COVID are not big money spinners, I think it's safe to say. But in the context of the future parking and access strategy for Alresford, we do need to think, how can we use this money for best effect in order to support the town, including active travel. And indeed, we've said in the city, and I don't see why it wouldn't apply to Alresford as well, that even considerations such as buses and other such things, bike parking, all kinds of facilities fall within the scope potentially of this budget.
That's right. And any transport or travel related investment can be funded from the income generated from this. I would echo the point you make though. In the current climate, actually forecasting exactly what that additional income might be is going to be quite challenging. But we are very able to identify any additional resources from that and choose how we allocate that.
Okay. And okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much indeed. And that, I suppose, feeds back into the question on enforcement on Sundays. I I'm not entirely sure. Is there this is, I don't know who's what is there any specific commitment to how we enforce as part of the agreement with the Mid Hampshire Railway? Mr. Williams.
No, the intention is we would continue enforcing as we do at the moment, but you know, there isn't a commitment to enforce on Sundays in their area.
And I suppose there's also the challenge in terms of Sundays. I mean, this is obviously a matter for further discussion, but the challenge as far as Sundays is concerned is that the parking in East Street, West Street and Broad Street is uncontrolled on Sundays. I think the parking order only applies Monday to Saturday. And similarly, there is no control on parking in the other two car parks, Albury Park and Perrins, on Sundays. So they will be free and uncontrolled on Sundays as well. Is that correct?
That is at the moment. And then whilst it's, yeah, you say it's uncontrolled, anything which is dangerous or legal, we would enforce.
Right. Okay. Now that's helpful perspective. But in principle, for example, if and please, if anybody wants to correct me, if somebody wants to park for 6 hours on East Street or West Street or Broad Street on a Sunday, they can. Although presumably would rather they didn't. That's a matter for the future parking and access strategy for Alresford. Okay. One other issue that has come up is the question of the implementation period. And the paper isn't crystal clear on this. Presumably, packing people onto railway trains for leisure purposes is something that comes fairly late in the unlocking process. I don't know if we have any sense of when they're looking to reopen and how that might work, and how it might work in terms of timing. And because, I mean, presumably it's quite hard to implement if the Mid Hampshire Railway isn't open. Do we have a sense of when that might be? Do we need to be clear that the implementation date shouldn't really be any sooner than the end of lockdown, and or the reopening of the Mid Hampshire Railway? Mrs. Knight.
Councillor Todd, can I just bring your attention to the last recommendation? And I think it probably comes into all these unknown questions that we're starting to bring up, but understandably, and I agree that they need to be asked. The last one is the need to monitor and review, and part of it is because these questions were coming up with officers, and therefore it went into review and monitor because, as you say, central government have put us slightly at their whim, and we just literally don't know the answers to some of these questions.
Right, okay. And that's the only hand I have up. Okay, that's helpful, but I think it may be helpful to maybe put something in that seeks to agree. There are clearly a few open issues that we may want to flag in the recommendations that don't change any of the ones that are there, but we may wish to put some areas in where we want to seek to agree some particular issues. I think those are all the issues that I've got written down. My notes say size and space isn't very tight, but I think we've covered that. I think there are a couple of. Oh, I have two hands up. Councillor Power.
Councillor Todd, thank you. Could we agree that committing to install EV charging points in the station car park when we only have a 3-year lease
Apologies.
is not a positive intent? Thank you.
Okay, I will. I think what we will do there, because that is also a matter of agreement between us and the provider of EV charging points, who may wish to, for example, come to an agreement with the station. So I think maybe what to review. I think we can put in that we will explicitly review the location of the EV charging points in the light of this decision.
Thank you.
I'm just writing that down, and I see Mr. Finch's hand up. So, Mr. Finch.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. You've just preempted me on that last question. Actually, I was just going to come in and clarify. As you know, I think you're part of a group that looks at the rollout programme for the EV charging. We've rolled out most of them, as you know. This is one of the sites that have yet to be delivered, but we're pretty close now to getting all of them implemented, which is good. Just to reassure Councillor Power, when we're looking at where we're siting these within any of the car parks, including Midhants car park, if we were to site the EV charging there, which is the intent, is to put them in our section of this car park, we would need to look at things like way leave or whatever for the supply of the power to that. And that is something I know that David Ingram, who leads on the rollout of the programme, is very aware of. So yes, we'd obviously only proceed with that if we had a longer term arrangement and agreement in place to make sure we don't lose the power after 3 years, because it crosses the Mid Hampshire part of it. So that's something that's already under review on that particular site. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay. I would. Are there any other points that need to be made? I think the recommendations as they stand are helpful. I think there are 3 other issues that I would like to record, just so everybody's clear, and I apologise to officers for adding this level of complexity. So I'll try and say these slowly and clearly so people are. So the recommendation, I would add recommendation 4, which is to review the location of the EV charging points in light of this decision. Another number 5, which is to ensure provision for vans to park with season tickets, preferably through agreement with Mid Hampshire Railway or otherwise via adjustment in our area of the car park. And I think something that's a bit clearer on implementation period, but again needs to reflect the fact that we don't have control over this, which is to seek to agree an implementation date, preferably no sooner than the end of lockdown and the reopening of the Mid Hampshire Railway, that is mindful of business conditions, that is also mindful of business conditions in Alresford as well, or something like that. Are those clear enough? Are those okay as decision? Councillor Power?
Could we also please have a commitment to write to stakeholders when that implementation plan becomes evident, and that implementation plan to include confirmation that permit holders will be written to?
So we're sort of, we're up to 7 now. Apologies. Here we go.
It can go into the implementation plan.
Yes. Okay. An implementation plan. Right. Okay. To seek to agree an implementation plan and date. Can't remember exactly how I said the rest of it. Reflecting the end of lockdown and the reopening of the Mid Hampshire Railway and business conditions in Alresford, including communication to permit holders and local stakeholders.
And a period of leniency?
I think we'll leave that as an operational question. We didn't do it, and we will operate the same way as we did in Winchester, which is I think we did in practice have a week's leniency, but we didn't tell anybody. But we will do that. We will operate that in line with normal changes to car parking measures. Mr. Botham.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Yeah, I would support that that final point that of course we'll have a leniency consideration within implementation for enforcement, but you know, keeping that operational I think is the right way. Just some concern on the middle additional recommendation that you suggested, which was to ensure provision for vans, either through negotiation with Midhant or in our own area. I think we would seek to do that. Whether or not we can ensure it within those 2 areas we'll take a bit of further analysis. I think. So,
okay, so at this point, so we will seek to, because it is our clear intent. It's been very helpful to get that input from the chamber, and we have two options in terms of how we proceed. And I think the point, and maybe the point about maybe actually, I think what we do in terms of the partnership with local stakeholders is on recommendation 3, agree to monitor and review these arrangements in partnership with local stakeholders following implementation, including as part of the parking and access strategy. I think so we'll add the words in partnership with local stakeholders to number 3. Do officers feel like they have a clear record of the other decisions I've taken today?
Chair, I wouldn't mind just running through it if it's Nancy.
That would be really helpful if you could do that.
Thank you.
Nancy, sorry, I'm going to cut in. Chair, I'd actually like to simplify your last one. Agree an implementation plan with taking into consideration lockdown and stakeholders, which would include their business community. So maybe Nancy and I can work on that one, but just simplify it so that it's a bit more all-encompassing for what we've heard today, and I think takes into account the issues that people have raised.
Yeah, maybe it's implementation date. I think we need to probably call it out as implementation date, because otherwise we're making it sound like everything is reopened.
Right.
I think if we've got the ongoing engagement in recommendation 3 and the implementation date, it's lockdown, the reopening of the Mid Hampshire Railway, and other relevant local conditions or something like that, because I do think we need to be in a position to have a sensible conversation with the Mid Hampshire Railway where we're able to say, look, okay, let's, is this the right thing to do, right? What flexibility do we have right now?
Yeah, and I was just going to add to Richard's, I was actually concerned about the same provision that Mr. Botham was as well, because we do actually need to run through a business plan and do a proper business.
So that one is to seek
things to
provision.
back up the decisions before we actually make these changes.
Okay, so that one I think is to seek provision for vans rather than to ensure. Because what we're saying is, and because there was the point that was made, whereas if we suddenly discover that it has a kind of disastrous effect in the end area of the car park, then I think we would rather go back and talk with local businesses to say, look, this is the only way we can do it in engineering terms. Is this what we want? To have that conversation. Okay, I think there was a desire to quickly run through what the recommendations were.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Right, so I have that you want to amend the recommendation 3 to include the words in partnership with local stakeholders after the word arrangements, so between arrangements and following.
Yes.
And then we have a new recommendation 4 to review the location of electric vehicle charging points in the light of this decision.
Yes.
Recommendation 5 to seek to ensure provision for vans to park with season tickets, preferably through agreement with the Mid Hampshire Railway or otherwise through adjustments to our area of the car park.
Yes.
And then recommendation 6, I think we were going to leave, and Catherine and myself are going to have a discussion to simplify it, but it was to seek to agree an implementation date, preferably no sooner than the end of lockdown and the reopening of the Mid Hampshire Railway. That's mindful of business conditions in Alresford, including communication with permit holders and local stakeholders. But that was the one that Catherine.
Yeah, that one's ended up as a bit of a yeah, it might need it, I think.
But is that the intention?
That is very much the intention. I think those are the 3 things. I think we just need to be looking at, if revenue isn't coming back, if nobody's parking in the car park, then if the town is still struggling, then we just need to make sure that we're clear that we will keep talking to Mid Hampshire Railway about the right date to reopen, and we need to be mindful of the end of lockdown. And I think maybe I think the point about communication is a slightly different point, but I think maybe we just break that out and say to ensure that there is specific communication to permit holders, to season ticket holders about these changes or something like that. Is just break that out and put it in as a separate point is a more sensible thing. That we can ensure, I think, Richard. We can afford the stamps, can't we, Mr. Botham? You have a.
we can rather than officers take away when we work outside of the meeting. I would prefer that we agree a recommendation here today, if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
The Mid Hants Railway have agreed with us that they fully expect a reasonable implementation period for this. They're not seeking an immediate implementation. So if we could agree something along the lines that we determine a reasonable implementation period with the Mid Hants Railway, and taking account of the reopening of businesses in Alresford, then something assured as that, I think, will reflect the point that we'll do our best to negotiate the best implementation we can.
Yeah.
But and of course, as far as communication with season ticket holders, we can agree to do that anyway, whether that needs to be a formal recommendation in the report.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll do it anyway.
Yeah.
If it's helpful to put it in the report, we will do so, but we'll do it anyway. Okay. And I think your wording is fine, actually, and much shorter and clearer.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's. I think that's everything. I think we've covered all the issues. I think we've updated the recommendations to reflect the particular needs that need to be discussed. Thank you very much indeed to officers. Well, thank you everybody who's attended. Thank you for the really helpful and useful contributions that everybody's made on this particular item. So I think we've now adjusted the recommendations. So following that input, in addition to all the points made in the report, and therefore we will make the decisions as I've outlined. So thank you all indeed very much again for attending. Thank you for all the points made. We will continue to work against the points that everybody has highlighted. That concludes the formal business for this morning, and thank you very much indeed for attending.
Thank you, Councillor Todd.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.